Collected Essays of Valerie Lynn Stevens on reaching a state of harmonic dissonance. We will never be able to know what really is, at least within our current corporeal incarnation. We all exist within our own subjective bubbles of relative perception and variations of experience. This is why harmonic coexistence with our fellow humans is oftentimes so difficult. For we are all bound by the laws of inevitable solipsism. The only thing we can know for sure is fully real is that of our own internal phases of consciousness. Although we still must not rely too much upon this existential assurance, as it can so easily be disturbed when we come into conflict with others' own worlds. It seems, at least upon the macrocosmic surface, that the nature of the natural material world is chaotic, random, and even cruel. Yet many physicists use the term unitary transformations to denote the inherent order and consummate logic to the universe. A preferred statement of mine is that there is indeed order, albeit order of an infinite complexity. In other words, there exists an order that, to our naked human eye of finitude and myopia, cannot be fully comprehended. Moreover, the problem arises when I begins in a tenable position of being in agreement with itself, yet comes into hostile or even merely indifferent opposition to that which is not I, that its own existence begins to assume a menacing or persecutory aspect. Thus the question is, how can one be both for oneself and for the other without losing total ego integrity? This is perhaps a question best left to rhetoric, or to the late but brilliant humanist psychoanalyst R.D. Laing, rest his soul if he were still with us. It just seems to be a characteristic of this human experience that a great deal of life is spent in seeking harmony between the inner and the outer. And when the I does not first trust itself, such existential dissonance is identified with even more strongly, thereby potentially leading one to crushing despair, disillusionment, and even projective psychosis, rage, hostility, or even violence towards the so-called externals. For in this particular state, the world, quote, out there, seems obstinate and or hostile towards us. But all begins first from within. And this is important wisdom to adhere to, for once we turn against our very own organism, the search for inner and outer unification is rendered fruitless. For after all, perception molds reality. But are we doomed to repeat an endless cycle of wholeness to fragmentation, to wholeness to fragmentation? I think we are. It is yet another intractable feature of our human condition. Yet I suppose even when we manage to come somewhat to terms with the fact that conflict, suffering, and loneliness are inevitable, we nevertheless seek to quell them. There evermore will remain yet another intractable feature of our humanity, to ask questions to which we already inherently possess the answers. Yet perhaps the lesson to cultivate a quiet and full embrace of life and all of its glories and vagaries is, in and of itself, the purpose of this very existence. I suppose the reasoning intellect will never make sense of the logic of the spirit, as it will always view, to a certain degree, a submission to life's vagaries as an act of debasing and ignoble prostration before it. In finale, it is this fallible assumption that becomes the ruin of most things dedicated to transcendental inquiry and exigency. For there is much convenience inherent in casting God as a petty tyrant than as a kindly sage, as we often feel that we could never possibly prove our worthiness of such divine heritage, and go on seething with a seemingly indefatigable rage against demons and angels we have merely invented inside of our own heads. Hence, where is all of this leading to, this life? And answer, no, because there are just as many as there are questions to complement them. Thus, perhaps the fight has already been won. Must we have it all figured out beforehand? We weren't taught how to breathe now, were we? Perhaps every salient aspect of our human biology and metaphysiology is a function of the autonomic nervous system. Perhaps all of this life and its guardian and bestower requires of us is to trust in the inherent perfection of his design and plan, merely awaiting our actualization of it. Perhaps the only way to kill an enemy is to love him, because the thing is, he was never the true enemy to begin with. Then it would follow that perhaps the only way to kill that so labeled, egoistic, false I which threatens to consume us is not by dying to it, but rather bringing it back from the death it has been for too long already dying, into a life well versed in harmonic dissonance.